So to start with this exercise is going to require two people. It's going to require one person who's guessing the notes and another person who's playing the notes, preferably at a piano, though you could use a guitar or another instrument. So the person guessing the notes, of course, is going to be the one who is going to be benefiting from the exercise. They're going to be the one that is going to be in the process of acquiring perfect pitch. To start off, the person guessing needs to pick a reference note. This is going to be the first note that they're going to memorize, quote unquote. They actually will memorize it, but I use quotes, so I'll explain why exactly later, maybe in another video, why I phrase it that way. So, for our purposes, for this example, it's going to be C, which sounds right here. What the person needs to do, who's guessing the note, they need to sing a C. They need to make sure that their vocal cords are vibrating. They can either sing it out loud or hum it before the person who's playing the piano plays the note. So you have to hear something like that. If the person who's singing is sharp or flat, like if they're going and then the person plays the piano and they recognize that they're sharp, they shouldn't stop singing. They should correct the pitch until they're singing in tune like this. Same thing if they're flat. Then once they sing in tune as the piano's playing, the person who's playing the piano picks a random note for them to guess. So in this instance, let's use the note A, which sounds right there. The person who's guessing can use whatever methods necessary to determine what that secondary note is. So if they recognize that this interval is a major sixth, if they sing up in half steps and they count the half steps until they reach A, and that's how they get it, that's perfectly fine. It's all fair and game to guess the second note. If they guess incorrectly, so let's say they say G and then B, they get unlimited guesses until they guess correctly. From time to time, what I like to do is if the person is having a rough time guessing the note, I'll tell them sing the C one more time, and so they'll do this, and then play it for them, and then I'll sing the second note, in this case the A, again. But I'm not going to tell them what that note is. After they guess this note correctly, then they need to go back to the first step rather. They need to sing the C before it's played, like this. And again, if they're out of tune, they repeat the process of correcting their intonation while they're still singing. They shouldn't stop singing. Then, after they sing in tune for a second or two with that C, then you just add in another note. So let's say right here, that of course is an F. They can use whatever methods necessary to get the note. Past this point, the exercise really is just repeating itself over and over and over again. And this is just the first step in the exercise, but this will take you a long way. After someone gets familiar with memorizing this C, then you can add in another note. So let's say make the reference note F, and then make maybe the third reference note is G. And they'll just do the same process for those two notes as well, for F and G. So they'll sing an F. That's a B flat. They can use whatever means necessary to guess the B flat. Then after they guess the B flat correctly, then they have to sing the F again. The reason why this exercise works is because that secondary note, so let's go back to that reference of C. This secondary note, in this case the first example was A, is really a distraction from the original note. So that person is using whatever means necessary to get that A. You're kind of trying to get them away. You're trying to get them unfocused from the C originally, and then they're having to recall the C again. And then you just keep doing the same thing. You might do like an E, and they guess that, and then they're having to focus on the E, then they go back to the C. That's why a lot of people feel like it's cheating to use relative pitch to guess those notes, but that's why it doesn't matter at all the technique they use, because the whole point is they're getting away from that note. And the reason why this exercise works is because you're hearing the C a whole bunch of times in the context of other notes that aren't C. So A, whoops, F, F sharp, B, E flat, and going through all 12 notes, obviously mixing up the registers that you use it with. A lot of people, I understand, that's the basics of the exercise. Let me talk a little bit more about this exercise. I know a lot of people are very frustrated with other exercises that claim to give you perfect pitch. In particular, the two methods I've seen that are very, very prevalent are playing the same note over and over and over and over and over again. If you look up on YouTube, you have these perfect pitch drones where that's what they're called, where it's just one note being played for 2 hours and the video has like 7 or 8 million views on it. It's very unfortunate to see people waste their time like that. That doesn't work because you're only hearing one note and you're not hearing that note in the context of other notes that aren't that note. The analogy I always like to use is if you're learning a second language, one of the worst things you can do is to just focus on one word and not expose yourself to any other words. The example I always like to use is that if you're trying to teach somebody the word flower in the English language, trying to teach them how to pronounce that word, and showing how it's different from other words, you would compare it to words that are similar and words that are significantly different. So you would say flower, then you'd say the word sour because it rhymes with the word flower. Then you would say octopus because it's completely different from the word flower. And this exercise is doing the same exact thing, just with notes. The second method that I've seen for people acquiring perfect pitch is just playing random notes like this and trying to guess them. That, of course, doesn't work because you have no reference at all. So you're given a whole bunch of context, but you're not zeroing in on anything in particular, so you're just constantly confused the whole time. Again, this first method of listening to one note over and over again doesn't work because you're given no context with that one note. You only have a reference. The second method of playing random notes doesn't work because you have no backdrop to compare those notes to. You don't have a reference to begin with. You need a reference and you need the randomness as well. The downside, of course, of this exercise is that it requires two people to do, but for anyone out there who's a programmer, I'm sure you could program a random pitch generator that also plays a reference in between every single pitch it randomly generates. So I'm no tech guy, but I imagine it wouldn't be too difficult to program an app like that. There are already random pitch generators out there. So I imagine it's, again, I don't know programming, maybe it's a lot harder than I think, but in my mind, it seems like it'd be relatively easy to program an exercise that would do this. But that's the limiting factor, is that you need two people. You need somebody who's playing the reference for you and then playing random notes as well. After a certain point, once you've memorized about 3 notes, and this is the part where people just don't believe me, because a lot of people will see what I say about memorizing notes and say like, oh, you're going to do that with all 12, right? You don't have to. Now, if you went through the exercise that way with all 12 notes, that wouldn't be a bad idea, and that wouldn't be a waste of time. But you don't actually have to do so in order to get perfect pitch. What happens is after you memorize 3 or 4 notes, eventually your relative pitch fills in the gaps. So then you're able to get all the other notes, maybe either 8 or if you went up to 6, maybe the 6 other notes you haven't memorized if you went that high. You'll be able to deduce those from the other notes that you currently know. And then this is the part where people just really don't believe me when I say this, but eventually at a certain point in time, your relative pitch just sort of morphs into perfect pitch, and you don't need a reference for any note at all. And it's one of those things where you're not going to believe it until you experience it. An analogy I like to use a lot when talking about this exercise in perfect pitch in general, of course, is learning a second language. And the analogy I would use here is that when you talk to somebody who's learning a second language, or has become fluent in a second language rather, they will tell you that after a certain period of time, and for everyone it's going to be different, eventually they were able to just think in that second language they were learning, to the point where they spoke it as fluent as a native speaker, and it felt natural to them. But it takes a long time to get to that point, and it's going to be different for different people. Obviously, polyglots are going to pick that up a lot faster than people who've never even tried to learn a second language in their life. So if you're if you're a lifelong musician who's practicing consistently and is in tons of ensembles, this exercise will probably benefit you very, very well. A couple of the variations of this exercise that you should do as well is when you do the reference, play 2 notes based off that reference as well, and do the same thing. What I'll typically do is when somebody guesses 2 notes, if I will tell them what guesses are correct and which ones are wrong. So let's say right now I'm playing G and B. Let's say the person guesses G and E instead. I'll tell them the G is correct and the E is wrong. And then from time to time, we'll do the same thing where if they're having a really huge trouble getting that B natural, I'll say sing the C again, and then I'll play the 2 notes for them once again. You can do the same thing with 3 notes, with 4 notes, and with 5 notes. As you add more and more notes, it's going to get exponentially harder and harder. The other thing I want to mention with this exercise, is that similar, again, to go back to the language analogy, if you are fluent in a language, like a lot of English speakers in the States, um, they'll have a rough time understanding somebody else who speaks English who has a really thick Scottish or Irish accent. And a similar phenomenon is going to happen with when you're trying to acquire perfect pitch based on instruments that you play and instruments that you don't play. So I'm primarily a brass player. I have a very easy time hearing brass instruments and knowing what notes they're playing. I don't have as easy a time with woodwinds. I don't have as easy of a time with strings, but I've trained enough with those instruments. I've done this exercise enough and other exercises, because once you get perfect pitch, you don't have to do this exercise. You can do other ones, and it'll work just fine with other instruments. And so I'm able to recognize those notes. To this day, I still have a big problem with singers, because I haven't spent enough time trying to work my way up with perfect pitch with singers. So if singers are like singing a chord, it's really difficult for me to deduce what they're singing. I can do it, but I have to sit and think about it for quite some time. Whereas with brass instruments, I can do it almost instantaneously. So again, to go back to that analogy, if you were trying to understand somebody who has an Irish or Scottish accent, you're going to have to listen to that person for a long period of time and listen to that general accent for a long period of time, deduce the different ways that they pronounce their words. And you should do the same thing with different instruments. You should do this exercise. I'm of the belief right now that you should probably do it with just one instrument. I typically start with this grand piano sound, right? You want that consistency in the beginning, but eventually it's not a bad idea to branch out to other instruments. Maybe I have a digital piano here, so I can always do, an electric piano sound like this. But using other instruments, I've done this with a trumpet before. I do this with guitars on a regular basis with other people. I've done this with a bass before. I've never tried it with vocals or bowed string instruments, as I don't play those instruments. And I haven't done it with woodwinds because I'm not a woodwind player, but you could definitely do it with woodwinds, no problem. But that's the gist of the exercise. I might make another video on this. I know this is a very low effort video because I'm just too lazy to do any type of video editing. But that's the gist of the exercise there. A general timetable you could expect in getting perfect pitch is it's going to be wildly different based on your experience. But I would say probably give it at least several months. When I first started doing this my junior year of high school, I was doing this 2 to 4 hours every single week with a friend of mine, and we were consistent about it. We did not skip weeks. It probably took us at least several months before we started being able to recall multiple notes without needing a reference to begin with. I chose B flat as my primary note because I was a brass player, and then I chose F as my secondary note, and then E flat as my tertiary note. Those are all the ones I did the exercise with. So you can't rush this. It's going to take some time. Again, to go through the exercise, you're going to the person guessing the note is going to sing the note before it's played, then it'll be played. Then a random note will be played. They need to guess that note. However method they want to use is just fine. So if you recognize it's a perfect fourth, that's an F. If they guess incorrectly, the person playing the note will tell them, nope, that's not correct. Have another guess. And they get as many guesses as they need until they get it right. Then they sing that reference note, in this case C, before it's played, continue to sing it while it's being played, and then another random note is played. So if you could guess that, that's a minor sixth, or a minor sixth ascending, or a major third descending, then whatever technique they need to use, they guess that's an A flat. They keep guessing if they guess it incorrectly until they guess correctly that it's an A flat. Then they sing the C again. And rinse and repeat over and over again. Hope that helps.